When I was growing up, I sort of felt like my parents had it all figured out. Like my dad and my mom were such capable people that they had life perfectly understood, that they were masters of it all, and that they would be able to take care of it and teach me everything I need to know for my life to go in the direction I wanted it to. But as I've grown up, I've started to realize a little bit more that, you are your own person. You are your own individual. And in a way, your parents don't owe you anything. No one in your life owes you anything. We might assume that at least our parents do, but in nature, a snake has its kids and just leaves them behind. Those snakes never have that privilege of having people in their lives to support them. They're sort of on their own from the start. And this doesn't have to be a negative perspective. I'm not here to sit and tell you guys like no one in your life cares about you. There's no one who will support you. Because genuinely, I think a lot of us are blessed that we do have the right people in our lives. But I think it is not just a given guarantee that you have those people in your lives. Some people genuinely don't have anyone they can rely on, anyone who will help or support them in any way. Some people are genuinely just on your own. Because at the end of the day, in some ways, from certain perspectives, we're sort of alone in this world. It is a solitary journey we make. Like, no one can read our minds, no one can see into our heads and know what we're thinking or how we're feeling. Like, the way we experience the world is a solitary journey, and the things we go through our own development at times, there's no one you can really lean on to that extent. There's no one that's really going to be able to make that right. Like, you are sort of alone in this world. We are each our own solitary individuals that have this framework, this community around us, but it's not necessarily the same as being in a team through life. It's sort of like free agents cooperating when it makes sense to. It's like, I think that in a way, realizing that no one's coming to save you, that nothing's going to change if you're not the one who actually takes control of it, can be a very liberating thing. I think I started to realize that as I grew up, especially around the time that I started to develop these very specific, pretty severe health issues. Because although my parents are really supportive people, it felt like they couldn't understand what I was feeling at all. When I first started to develop these, my breathing got really bad as one of the first symptoms, and my mom just thought it was COVID. Like, she couldn't understand how terrible I was feeling in that moment when I was begging her to bring me to the hospital. And I realized, through those health issues, having something that was impossible to put into words, that they couldn't really understand the same way as emotions, like all these people around me, they'd never experienced what I had. And it's really hard to put yourself in the shoes of someone who has some crazy bodily feelings you've never had. Like, I had this feeling for a long time where it felt like I could never get a full breath. Like, it was always just shallow. Like, I tried to breathe, but there was like a weight on my chest. And for whatever reason, people never understood. I think they always underestimated what I was going through, what I was actually dealing with. And I used to, at first, as a coping mechanism, want to talk about how I was feeling a lot. I wanted to try to make people understand the way I was feeling. But with enough time, I started to realize, they will never understand how these health issues feel. They will never understand necessarily what I'm going through exactly. Not that they can't love me regardless and have, an understanding that I am going through something. They can react emotionally in the way I want them to, but they won't actually, know what I'm going through in that way. And that doesn't have to be a terrible thing. It's just a reality that we have to acknowledge and, live with. And maybe that's easier for some people. But for me, I'd always felt like, that was a hard thing to cope with. That was a hard thing to realize that I actually sort of am alone. Like, these health issues made me realize that, because it was the first thing in my life that felt so specific and unique to me in that point that, I was the only one who could actually make a difference in these health issues. They could bring me to doctors, but, that didn't help me specifically. But it's like there was nothing they could do to help ease the emotional burden of having those problems. And as I've gotten even older and I've started to go through things in my life, I've realized this in an even broader sense, that, you are on your own in a way in life. And, no one can really help you with your problems. Like, we try to help people around us, but for the most part, for meaningful change in someone's life, they have to be the one pursuing that themselves. Like, if you were in a terrible place like I was for so long, I almost felt entitled that I thought the people around me would help me and, lift me up, and I felt like this was too much for me to overcome. This was too much for me to be able to push through. And so I was sort of self-limiting myself. But when I realized that genuinely no one could do anything for me, then it was all on me. And then no matter how incapable I felt of dealing with this challenge, I knew that I had this challenge, and so I had no choice if I wanted to change but to step up and do what it took to change that. It's like I read this book, I reference it a lot on this channel. It's my favorite book of all time, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. It's about this Jewish psychologist in a concentration camp in World War II. And he says something to the same effect, where he's talking about being taken away from his family and his wife and being put in this camp and having his head shaved and his name written off the record and a number tattooed on his arm. And he said he wasn't Viktor Frankl anymore. He was prisoner 0195 or whatever, And he said, in a way, like when he couldn't express himself openly, when he felt like everything in his life, all of his possessions, all of his relationships had been taken away, that all he had was himself, his own relationship and connection with himself deep within. And although it is not the same situation at all, when I read that, I kind of resonated with what he was saying, because I felt when I had those health issues, when I was suddenly faced with the harshest reality I had up to that point, because I'd lived a very sheltered life, I was young, and I've had a good family for the most part, I realized, wow, like actually there are limitations to the expression of human beings to one another. Like there are certain things you'll never be able to help people understand, and we live in our own worlds in a way. We can sort of take glimpses of each other's worlds, but you'll never be able to connect on that level. And when I realized that, I started investing more into my relationship with myself, more into, cultivating a friendship in a way, and a self-love and a self-acceptance within myself. I feel like before that point, I sort of used other people to validate who I was. I wanted other people to understand me. I wanted other people to be able to see eye to eye with me. And I felt like at least if, my best friends know who I am, then it doesn't matter so much if certain people misunderstand and misinterpret my actions and construe me in a negative light. But eventually I realized that my relationships were sort of codependent for that reason. They were sort of hampered by my neediness of wanting to be understood. Nowadays it's like I don't feel the need to be understood because I have that bedrock of that relationship with myself, and my friendships have been improved for that. It's like I think in a way that, although this is kind of an out there topic, not everyone might fully understand or relate or agree with what I'm saying. I do think it has a lot of practicality. I think if you're in a place where it feels like words just can't do it, whatever situation you're in, it might feel like there's no getting out of it. What you need to realize is genuinely that is just the nature of this reality. And it's hard, but in a way, it is an innately solitary existence. You will never be able to fully understand anyone. They will never be able to fully understand you. But that's okay. Just cultivate this relationship with yourself. Take accountability, take responsibility, and cultivate an internal locus of control. Realize that no one is coming to save you. That's just the harsh reality. That's what I've learned from growing up. That's what I feel like most people learn as they grow up. And you can change that. You can, at least within yourself, have a good enough balance, a good enough equilibrium that you can confront these problems without needing to be dependent on others, without needing others to understand you or what you're going through. And once you've done that, I feel like that's the first step to true emotional freedom. I think that's what Stoicism is really about. At least that's how I've been able to really incorporate those principles and concepts. Because before that point, it seemed like it was just too far out there. It seemed like it was too much of an ask, Now I think I understand. Now I think I know what growing up is really about. Like what you learn that makes you an adult versus a child. And yeah,